A little, dirty puppy stood steadfastly on the rails, tail wagging with determination, amidst the bustling sounds of a busy railway station. Bystanders were concerned when the dog hesitated to move, his gaze locked on a spot beneath a nearby bench. Someone called the police because they were concerned about the puppy's safety. As officers approached the insistent puppy, their demeanor changed from wonder to alarm. But he refused to move under any circumstances. They became pale when they discovered why. When the cops eventually got the puppy off the railway tracks, all it seemed to want to do was go back on. They'd never seen a young animal so determined, but with the trains now running again, they couldn't let it happen. But an employee at the railroad station had decided she wanted to find out why this puppy was so determined to jump back into probable death. She instantly ordered all trains to stop. She only hoped she wasn't too late. They should have listened to the puppy sooner. But what was the puppy doing on the track? Why did the cops have to intervene? And why was the animal so determined to return? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. People at the train station were frequently worried about the presence of stray animals near the lines. It was impossible to foresee whether they would get on the track and slow down the trains, or, worse, be murdered on those rails. Employees even kept an eye on pets that individuals brought with them, making sure they were always leashed or put in a cage. Just after the daily morning rush hour, the station became less congested and the number of trains passing decreased. Normally this was the point at which staff could exhale a sigh of satisfaction that everything had gone as planned for the day. However, not this morning. They received a call from one of the train operators who had just passed through the station. He reported seeing something move on the track. He hadn't noticed it until he was quite close, and he was lucky that it was at that moment on the track going the other way. However, because it was quite well disguised, the personnel had difficulty seeing it at first. Employees took this call very seriously and rushed to the station deck, where there were already a few of people who appeared to have seen the same event and the train conductor. Lily, one of the train station shop staff, was the one who first noticed it. It was scarcely moving and blended in with the rusted old train tracks, but she didn't have any doubts. On the tracks there was a puppy. Someone quickly called the two nearest train conductors and the local headquarters to inform them that they should not enter the station for the time being because they needed to send personnel on the rails to get something off it. They were not allowed to enter the railroad tracks until they received approval from everyone. That was only for their own protection, plus also allowed onlookers to have a better look at the sad puppy on the rails. It was definitely in poor condition. The small canine's fur was matted with debris from the tracks, and its eyes were wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. The puppy had embedded itself in a small crevice between the track and the gravel, its tiny frame heaving with rapid breaths, a clear sign it had been there for an unnerving length of time. It was evident that the puppy had not had the warmth of human touch or care for days. There was no collar to suggest an owner, and its desperate yelps echoed through the station, a plaintive call for help that fortunately did not go unheard amidst the chaos of the early hours. Rain had been intermittent that morning, and the poor creature was soaked to the bone. Each drop seemed to weigh heavily on it, its tiny paws pressing into the sodden earth as it sought something solid to stand against. The overcast skies showed no hint of sunshine to provide respite for the shivering pup. It was a sorrowful sight, indicating long-term neglect, which exacerbated the urgent need for its rescue. Close examination revealed that the puppy was notably underfed, its ribs almost jutting out of its thin frame. The instinctual spark for survival was there, but the energy required to act on it was visibly drained. Every sound of an approaching train caused the puppy to flinch in terror, yet, paradoxically, it appeared too weak to even attempt escape. Its health was clearly compromised, and it made soft whines that were heart-wrenching to hear. As onlookers observed the puppy, they noticed the dullness of its coat and eyes, a sign that it hadn't had a proper meal or clean water in far too long. The police had to act fast to prevent any further danger to the vulnerable animal. Lying close to the metal rails, the puppy was at severe risk of crushing injuries should any train come thundering by. However, its current predicament took precedence over the untold history that led it here. The puppy's past was a mystery, and whether it had strayed from a home or was abandoned on the track was unknown. With its fragile condition, there was an urgent requirement for medical attention. Dehydration and the potential for internal injuries made it necessary for the officers to handle the puppy delicately, ensuring no additional harm would come to it as they attempted to remove it from the rails. The intervention by the police officers and station personnel was not just a duty but a moral imperative. They represented the puppy's only chance at survival, their timely response a buffer between the pup and tragedy. The unseen actions they were about to perform could mean the difference between life and death for the stranded animal. It had evidently not spent its formative months in a loving and caring environment. It took around 5 minutes for everyone to agree that trains would avoid the station for the time being. The first train had already arrived and was impatiently waiting at the station's door. They, on the other hand, vastly misjudged this determined young animal. They assumed it would be a simple capture, because the puppy appeared to be frail and would not have the energy to run away from them for long. The puppy was making such a fool of the employees that spectators couldn't help but chuckle, despite their frustration with the delay. It was obvious that they would not be able to obtain the puppy. Bystanders even offered to aid, but it was against protocol, and if anything went wrong, the train station would be fully accountable. They even tried a different method of scaring the puppy away from the station. The spectacle had been going on for nearly 10 minutes, and there were several trains waiting. People were becoming agitated, and the employees realized they were running out of time. They required assistance from those who knew what they were doing and had the necessary tools. With passengers becoming increasingly agitated, station workers decided to contact animal control for assistance. However, they are severely understaffed and would not be able to arrive for at least another hour. That was going to take an eternity. It sounded absurd to ask police assistance in capturing or chasing away a stray puppy, but the longer this delay lasted, the more train traffic would be disrupted, and the more money it would all cost. Because all of this was taking place at a major train station, the cops arrived shortly. But first, they needed to pick up some equipment from animal control, which would take around 15 minutes. While the staff waited for the police to arrive, they did their utmost to ensure that at least some trains passed through safely. They attempted to lure the puppy to one of the tracks so that a train could slowly make its way onto the other track and continue its voyage. It was a sluggish and perilous prose. At one point, the dog went beneath one of the trains, bringing everything to a halt once more. Only 2 trains were able to pass in the time it took for the cops to arrive. However, when the police arrived, most of the passengers who had been waiting impatiently were put at ease. They were clearly taking this seriously. They arrived with 4 fit-looking cops, fully armed with capture nets and a cage to lock the puppy in. It was only a matter of time before they snatched the puppy. They immediately cornered and caught the homeless puppy in one of their nets. The animal squealed and trashed around as much as it could, but it didn't help. The officer swiftly lifted the net containing the puppy off the train tracks and placed the distressed animal in the little cage they had prepared. When they closed the little cage door, the puppy starts trashing in against the cage's side. Every step is made in the direction of the railway tracks. Despite being trapped within the cage, the puppy's spirit remained unbroken. Little claws scraped frantically against the metal, and its small body pushed with surprising strength, as if it understood its very freedom was at stake. Martian onlookers couldn't help but admire the puppy's determination, even as their eyes reflected a shared sorrow for its plight. The atmosphere was pierced by the sounds of the puppy's desperate whines, each one tugging at the heartstrings of the crowd gathered. The high-pitched cries echoed around the station, a poignant reminder of the fear and confusion experienced by the tiny creature now caught in an unfamiliar situation. To all who watched, the puppy was not merely an animal, it became the embodiment of struggle against overwhelming odds. As inside the cage, the puppy became a flurry of paws and fur, making repeated attempts to find any opening or weakness that might provide an escape. In one breath-holding moment, the puppy seemed to almost succeed in squeezing through the bars. The crowd's gasps turned into murmurs of encouragement, but the gap proved too narrow, and the attempt failed, leaving the audience in a suspenseful hold. Even as the puppy's energy should have begun to wane, it refused to yield to its confinement. Each successive attempt to escape seemed fueled by a raw determination that belied its diminutive size and the hopelessness of its situation. With every bit of its being, the puppy threw itself against the walls of the cage. The metallic clangs became a dramatic backdrop to the scene unfolding, turning the rescue operation into an unexpected display of resilience. Its relentless attempts at freedom were relentless, leaving observers to wonder where such a small creature found such boundless energy. The display was an impassioned dance of life, seeking to break free from the sudden constraint. The ordeal was more than a mere spectacle, it was a call to compassion that resonated with every person present. The puppy's resistance became a silent plea for kindness and freedom, one that would leave an indelible mark in the memories of all who witnessed it. The puppy's strength and determination caused the cage to tumble over. Why was this animal so desperate to be on the railway tracks? None of the people present have ever seen anything like this before. Whatever the rationale, it was primarily for future consideration. The trains needed to get back on track as soon as possible. There were a lot of people waiting at the station. The police offered to take the puppy to a neighboring shelter, but Lily, the train station shopkeeper, informed them she would take care of it. The cops, of course, agreed because she spared them the trouble. Lily had no plans to take this puppy to the shelter. She was determined to discover what was driving this puppy to continue running on the train tracks. Lily, of course, needed to keep the puppy locked away while all the trains were getting back on track. Only not right now. She knew exactly what would happen if she unlocked the cage, and it was also what she desired. She preferred to wait for a better opportunity. She eventually decided to keep the dog in the staff room for the time being. However, such conduct gave place to soft howling. The animal calmed down and ceased trashing in the cage after being transferred away from the railway tracks. The puppy was clearly upset. She had already had a terrible day, so she decided to use her lunch break to go buy some food for the animal. Because Lily knew the dog would most likely have to stay in that room for hours on end, she began to feel sorry for the animal. When she returned to the room, the puppy was still screaming, but at a considerably lower volume. It was definitely lacking in strength. Lily had no idea where it had come from or what it had done before arriving here. However, it could not have been easy. So when Lily opened the can of dog food, she watched its ears perk up almost immediately. The puppy appeared to have been living on the street for some time, and while it was not particularly underweight, it appeared to be in need of food. Its tail began to wag and its tongue emerged from its mouth, and the more it waited for food, the more it began to salivate. There was no doubt in my mind that this beast was hungry. She placed the dog food in a bowl for the puppy and watched it devour it. And Lily began to develop feelings for this animal. It did not deserve the life it had led thus far, and perhaps she might assist it in finding a better one. But Lily never lost sight of what she had originally hoped for her puppy to perform, and that was that it still needed to show her why it kept returning to the track. And she'd have that chance that evening. After lunch, all of the trains that had been delayed due to the puppy's behavior were back on schedule. The entire operation was back on track, which meant Lily could estimate when she would get her chance. The last train would arrive at the station about midnight. After that, there would be no traffic for the next 5 hours. Lily has plenty of time to get back on track with the dog, but the trouble was that her shift had already ended at 7 when all the stores closed. This also meant that the staff break room was slated to close, leaving Lily with nowhere to wait until midnight. She began to wonder if she really wanted to stay and discover the truth. Was it worth it to give up her entire evening to this weird puppy's antics? She might simply take the animal to the shelter. There was no need for her to bear this weight alone. It was exactly what she had promised the cops she would do, and it made perfect sense. But she knew she was doing the right thing as she gazed into the animal's eyes. There was no question about it. She decided to take the dog with her after her shift and go out to lunch at a nearby restaurant. She would sit and wait until practically midnight because the palace was open until 11 p.m. And they had no problem with her lingering if she sometimes ordered something to drink. They even brought the puppy water. At the restaurant, the animal was quite peaceful. They were quite far away from the rails, and Lily assumed that whatever was on the tracks was no longer detectable. It made her pleased to see him this way, but she couldn't wait to get back to the station. And the restaurant closed. Lily slowly but steadily made her way back to the station, and the closer they went, the more agitated the puppy became. She walked up to where the trains came and sat on one of the benches. The dog realized where he was and began to try to escape the cage with everything he had. Even as the train's arrival time approached, there were few passengers still at the station, However, the active puppy drew the attention of everyone in the room. Some even appeared to be upset at Lily for keeping this poor dog in a cage. She knew something they didn't, and she had a legitimate reason for putting the puppy in a cage, even though it wasn't for long because she could see the last train of the day pulling into the station. As the train pulled away from the station, leaving only Lily and the puppy behind, all of the station's lights went out for the night. The puppy wasted no time and ran towards the train tracks, jumping on it. Lily's heart was pounding in her chest as she pursued the animal. Because it was so dark, Lily could only hear the puppy doing something down there, so she had to use her phone's flashlight to locate the animal. He was still looking for what he had discovered earlier that day, and Lily examined the idea that this entity was no longer present at all. Perhaps someone had picked it up off the rails, or a passing train had hit it. But shouldn't the puppy have lost its smell by then? Since he was trapped in that cage, the animal had regularly reacted to something. Even now it was catching a whiff of something. If whatever it was hunting for was already gone, it couldn't have left such a powerful aroma. Lily's hands were trembling as she entered the vet's office, the weight of 2 precious lives resting on her decision to intervene. The vet, Dr. Jensen, had been practicing for over 2 decades, and her face exuded a calm, knowledgeable demeanor, exactly what Lily and her 2 new companions needed. They were ushered into the examination room without delay. First, Dr. Jensen attended to the puppy, whose resilience was evident despite the evening's ordeals. As she conducted the checkup, her practiced fingers worked expertly over the pup, checking for any signs of injury or distress. The puppy, though initially hesitant, seemed to understand that these hands were here to help, not harm, and soon enough, it lay still, the growling having ceased. Then Dr. Jensen turned her attention to the kitten. With each touch, the kitten let out feeble cries that tugged at the heartstrings. The vet's brow furrowed as she gently palpated the tiny body, her face betraying a hint of concern. The situation was grave. The kitten was dehydrated, weak, and needed immediate intervention. The diagnosis was swift. The kitten had suffered a minor fracture and was malnourished, likely contributing to an overall decline in its condition. Immediate IV fluids were necessary to counteract the dehydration and provide much-needed nutrients and energy. Jensen's team sprang into action, setting up the kitten with a warm bed and a slow drip of life-sustaining fluids. As the IV fluids took effect, the color slowly returned to the kitten's pale gums and its breathing stabilized. Lily, who had been anxiously watching over the examination, found herself taking her first deep breath of relief since the night began. Through it all, the puppy displayed an astonishing attentiveness towards the kitten, with eyes following every move Dr. Jensen made. It was evident that the bond these 2 creatures had forged was both uncommon and profound. Lily narrated how they were found to Dr. Jensen, who smiled softly, acknowledging the puppy's protective instinct. Dr. Jensen explained that the next few days were crucial for the kitten's recovery. For Lily, it meant frequent visits to the clinic, a responsibility she embraced wholeheartedly. They would have to keep the little one under observation to ensure it regained strength and monitor the puppy's health. The bond she had witnessed between the puppy and the kitten had instilled in her a new sense of purpose. Lily came to the practice a few days later to check on the animal's progress, and both of them were doing extremely well. In fact, the vet was preparing to transport them to a shelter where they could be adopted. But Lily had a different opinion. As Lily departed from the veterinarian's office that evening, cradling the puppy, now silent and observing with a watchful eye the back room where the kitten rested, she felt an indescribable connection. This was the start of an unexpected journey, she thought, looking down at the tired yet peaceful faces of her 2 charges. It wasn't just about saving lives, it was about the unexpected bonds of care and guardianship that intertwine the fates of beings, irrespective of their species. She had done a lot of soul-searching over the last few days and had finally decided what she wanted to do. She planned on adopting both the puppy and the cat. She had never contemplated getting a pet before, but this appeared to be fated by religion, and now the 3 are living happily together.